Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching the Andrew Tate Goes to Therapy video on the Cobra Conquer YouTube channel. Let's watch.
I think the only thing better than having everything you want is not wanting anything, right? So I have every car on this planet. I have 40 supercars. Most people want a supercar. I have 40. But there's that unique 0.1% of people who genuinely...
I don't want a supercar. It's a complete waste of money. Gasoline, energy. It would say something about me if I were to drive in such a thing. No, I do not want a supercar.
Don't want one. And I think that's more freeing than having everything you want, right? So the true mindset is not wanting anything. Most people, the best...
Wait, I interrupted him and I lost the thread. Let's rewind.
Where there's the potential for self-delusion.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not even going to sit here and say that I'm not delusional to a degree. I'm not saying that self-delusion doesn't exist. We all are, right? Let me give you a very simple example.
And then David even softened it further at saying, we all are, because Andrew Tate admitted that he is delusional. I think meaning that he is wrong about, it's hard to know exactly if they're on the same page, but David is saying that we all will delude ourselves about certain ideas about ourselves because it's too painful to recognize reality or whatever. And I think Andrew Tate is agreeing with that, although I'm not quite sure.
Analogy. I think the only thing better than having everything you want is not wanting anything, right? So I have every car on this planet. I have 40 supercars. Most people...
The only thing, what did you say? And of course he goes into another brat.
I think the only thing better than having everything you want is not wanting anything.
The only thing better than having everything you want is not wanting anything. Oh, so is he talking about the Buddhist notion of detachment from materialism, or just the healthy notion of lack of materialism? He's probably talking about stoicism and detachment from human needs within the manosphere, and really just around in various different spheres. There's this notion that if you try hard enough, you can distance yourself from your needs and you will rise above it all. And that's just not possible. We're not robots. And when people do that, there can be benefits to evaluating what you're attached to for sure, particularly material items, but to deny all needs, like needs for attachment or conversation or creativity or love, is not healthy to do to oneself. It'd be like saying, I don't need water.
Right? So I have every car on this planet. I have 40 supercars. Most people want a supercar. I have 40. But there's that unique 0.1% of people who genuinely don't want one. And I think that's more freeing than having everything you want, right? So the true mindset is not wanting anything. Most people, the best they can do is having everything they want. And I feel like you can kind of do this with the emotions as well, I guess.
It's interesting that he's saying that, because is he saying that the 0.1% of people who don't want material items, they're in the best mode? Because he's saying he's not one of those people, I think. Is he saying he's one of those people? But I also wonder if he's saying the enlightenment bit, where they're not only not materialistic, but they have risen above all human needs or something.
My general consensus is that I don't think I can change or affect the world to the point where pain and suffering and bad things are not going to happen. So isn't it best if I just enjoy all of that? Doesn't that make me as powerful as possible if I say, oh yeah, okay, this is going to suck, good. I mean, I do it when I fight.
Okay, so he's saying that he is, instead of wanting to not suffer, he's saying he can rise above it and say, I'm enjoying the suffering. Okay, so on one hand, that could be a healthy way of looking at things. There's a lot of notions and techniques and philosophy within my field of therapy and psychology that actually will talk about this, of not fighting reality, not fighting against what is happening to you, absorbing it or accepting it, radical acceptance, this kind of thing. And that doesn't end the suffering, though. For a time I had chronic back pain, and it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great. And I did a lot of different things, and it didn't really go away. After a while, it just randomly went away, which was weird. But there were many years where it wasn't going away. And at some point, so in the beginning of the pain, I would fight against it. I would say, okay, what do I need to do? Go to this specialist, get x-rays, do this physical therapy technique, take this medication, or do this massage thing or whatever. And it seems that some things would work, but it didn't take it away, really. And eventually, I found myself in a place where I was not only suffering from the pain, but I was suffering from the demoralization of the pain. I was suffering from the fact that I felt powerless over the pain. I felt like it was dominating my psyche, and if it was more intense, then I probably wouldn't have any ability to get rid of that feeling, because more intense pain, no matter what you do, it just breaks through the mind, depending on how things are going for you. But the pain was of a lower intensity such that at a certain point, I knew enough about this technique and did it for myself of just like, I need to accept that I have chronic back pain. And I'm going to continue doing all the things that I can to relieve it, but I need to just mourn. I need to grieve the notion that it won't go away. It's like I have this vision of myself or this hope for the future that I wouldn't have pain. I have lost that vision. I have lost that identity. I'm now someone that experiences chronic pain, and there was me before and there's me after. I have to grieve that loss, and I have to accept it. The pain is still there and it still sucks, and it is sad to recognize this. It makes me upset. But I was even more upset and more frustrated and more obsessed because I wasn't accepting the fact that I now have chronic back pain, And so for Andrew Tate, he might be saying that. Another thing he might be saying, though, is that he is narrativizing it in a way that actually isn't true, that he actually was suffering and wasn't acknowledging it to himself, wasn't reaching out to other people, wasn't being vulnerable and getting people to care about him. So he just frames it in his mind that he's rising above it. I don't know which one it is.
That engaging and exciting. I'm not going to lie to you. Although I am facing very serious charges, and although they are trying to destroy my life, and although I cannot sleep the same, and although they're out to get me, and although I've suffered.
Again, Andrew Tate is laying out in a very intellectual, very non-emotional way the suffering that he's going through. And it's tempting to interpret that as he isn't suffering, that he's just sort of identifying some bad things that are happening in his life because of the way he presents himself. And I'm positive he's going to take a turn now and say that he's got it all figured out. He has a technique, a mind technique, or an approach that solves all those problems and makes it so that he isn't sad or he isn't upset or angry or anything. And I'm positive that right now he's about to take a right turn and he's going to reframe this as him having the power over his emotions. But it's just another example of him. But it's interesting that he even mentions it. One of the profiles of someone who is on the narcissistic spectrum that will seek me out for therapy will be someone who has been suffering from narcissistic personality their whole life, but recently they went through a crisis that resulted in them being without the ability to engage in their defensive structure. Normally for narcissistic individuals, they have enough control in their life or whatever, such that they can manage other people's view of them, they can manage their own view of themselves. They have enough control. Like a typical presentation will be a narcissistic individual will find a partner, a spouse, someone that they get married to, who has related traumas such that they fit well together, and maybe it's codependency, over functioning or something, but it also could be dependency or something. But anyway, the narcissistic person and the other person, they fit well together, and the narcissistic person will go to work or leave, go into the world and will get a fair amount of narcissistic supply. They might even manage their image such that everyone thinks that they're a great person. They come home and all of this built up anger and hurt and rage will get funneled and directed at their family, at their spouse, and at their kids. And if you've been in a family like that, you can attest to just how maddening it is, because your parent is one way, but everyone else in the world thinks that your parent is like the best person on the planet, or at least they act like it anyway. So, meaning that when you really ask the people outside of your house what they think of your parent, they have problems with your parent too, but your parent is so good at making sure that that never gets brought to light that everyone thinks everyone worships the person when no one actually, it's weird. Anyway, but a common profile is that they'll come home and then, because they've had minor hurts all day long of insult and feeling inferior, and they engage in their technique. They get everyone to think that they're superior and awesome, but that doesn't take away the pain. They have to let it out somewhere. They'll come home and they'll rage or lecture or criticize or something. And then at some point, it's likely or possible that the spouse will have enough of that behavior and will divorce or something. And at first, the narcissistic individual will engage in trying to get control again, maybe even through abuse. But if that doesn't work and it's truly separate, then the narcissistic person has no way of dealing with their ongoing issues, and it starts sneaking out in their daily life. And then everything starts to fall apart because no one thinks they're superior anymore, and they don't think they're superior, and they might be seen as a bad person at work, in the community. And they're also worried that if it's known that they got divorced, then that could look bad for them. Everything starts to crumble for them because underneath this very thin, they're just walking on thin ice throughout their entire life. And underneath is this vast sea of inferiority and self-hatred. But for a long time, they can manage, and sometimes they'll break through the ice and they'll quickly, figure it out and, patch it up. And then when this happens, though, there's no ice. It's just, you're just plummeting into the abyss. And then they will go to therapy because they notice that they're suffering and they have no awareness. They have no conceptualization of why this is happening. They might even come to therapy and say, I need you to work on my partner. My partner has a problem. They're leaving me, that kind of thing. But at least they're in therapy and you can begin the road to wellness there. It's possible that for Andrew Tate, he went through that moment of crisis when he was in prison. You could imagine that, right? To be separated from his family, to be persecuted, to be blasted on media, in the media, to have to endure prosecutors and those within law enforcement interrogating him, maybe humiliating him, doing things to him. You could imagine that he would be brought pretty low. And if he does suffer from a personality disorder, then the suffering would be very, very high and it would be very noticeable. And so I'm just making up a story. I have no idea if any of this is true, but if it is, then it's possible that he emerged. And after, now that he's starting to recover a little bit, he's out of prison. It doesn't sound like he's out of legal trouble. It sounds like those are still possibilities, but he might have finally realized, I think I need to change the way I deal with emotions. And maybe that's why he's attracted to David. And he's engaging in these conversations because the way that it looks, Andrew Tate actually invited David to be on the podcast, invited David to be in this video. So it's possible that Andrew Tate is realizing that he needs to start to explore some of the vulnerability. And his version of that is very typical for someone in this state, where they will be a little bit vulnerable, like the way that he is. Prior to going to prison, he might not have ever said anything like this, even just pointing at suffering for him. He might just say, I've never suffered. I always figure out a way to. Now he's willing to admit a little bit, but the defenses are still there, right? So I don't know. It just makes you wonder.
Trying to destroy my life, and although I cannot sleep the same, and although they're out to get me, and although I've suffered, part of me is excited. Part of me is like, okay.
Why?
Because
he did the right turn that I predicted he would, and he's saying part of me, and that's fine. If that's how he sees it, it could be legit. It might not be self-delusion. But going back to where this conversation is they were talking about self-delusion, and then Andrew Tate launches into this, which could be argued another example potentially of self-delusion. And David, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but David's kind of smiling, I think, because he's in that same zone of like, there you do it. You're doing it again. You're sweeping it under the rug.
You like war.
I think all men do.
I do.
Yeah, of course. All men do. Yeah. So it's a battle.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. So I'm not saying I'm glad it happened, because I'm certainly not. And I'm not saying I'm going to win. But I'm saying that I've trained myself to the point where if I were walking down the street and 10 men were to pull knives on me, I'd be intimidated, but 20% of me would go, this will be one to remember.
Do you have a belief that you could take 10 men with knives?
I have a belief that, yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. That's delusional.
That's delusional.
Yeah, but it gives me a best chance of possibly winning.
Well, no, running away would give you the best chance of possibly winning.
Yeah, I think David is in the similar mindset that I would be if I were in his shoes of using his language and his metaphor and trying to evaluate it. So Andrew Tate is saying, I think it's not likely I would win in a fight with 10 people with knives, but if I'm going to win, I need to believe I'm going to win. And if I believe I'm not going to win, then I really am not going to win. But what David is saying is there's another option, which is you recognize that you are not invincible, and that will result in you running away. If you delude yourself to believing that you're perfect and superior and you can do everything, then you will run into problems. So recognizing your limitations and not being self-deluded might actually save you from a lot of problems.
And then coming back and being safe and then serving out your mission.
Of course I would run away in that scenario, but if I had to engage them, if I had to engage them,
right.
If I had to fight them, I believe I'd be the most capable if I believed I could win.
Of course.
Okay, so Andrew Tate went along basically with what David is saying. I wonder if David will now use it as a way of saying, okay, so how else are you self-deluding yourself regarding your superiority or your imperviousness to vulnerable emotions? How are you continuing to delude yourself into believing that you're fine and invincible when you should be running away, meaning you should recognize that you're a human being and you have vulnerability? I wonder if Dave will actually bring it back to his emotions. All right, well, let's adjourn there. I didn't know I would have so much to say, but of course I usually do. But I didn't know I would have this much. I didn't know it would be that interesting, frankly. I thought it would be really quite boring. But there's a fair amount of things to use as a jumping off point. So tune in next time when I continue watching, and everyone please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.